Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Futures Committee of the Fort Collins City Council. And Jonathan, just to make you aware, Council Member Emily Gorgo is with us. She's on the Futures Committee, as well as Julie Pignataro, Council Member Pignataro. So the three of us, this is Subcommittee of Council, and thank you all for joining us today. Just a few preliminaries with regards to these COVID times. This meeting is done virtually under the advice of local health professionals, and the city manager and I have determined that this is important, and it's going out via Zoom. You can also participate via a telephone, and if you have the Futures Committee agenda, both the Zoom and the phone instructions are there with the meeting ID. And with that, I call the meeting to order. And our first, as I get started, usually I just describe the Futures Committee and the purpose and how we operate. And so the Futures Committee is a subcommittee of council, as I've mentioned. And this particular committee, it deals with items that are not on the council's agenda per se. So not something that falls in our 6-month calendar, policy related or work session related. It gives the council and our community, where we usually have a large participation from our community in this committee, to actually share in our thought leadership and our conversation. We think about the Futures Committee as a think and do tank, where we bring up items that allow us to lift up our heads instead of the day-to-day policy making and oftentimes incremental conversations that one might have in a community. But we lift our head up and we look at the horizon on a particular topic and have a conversation, and we check to see if we even recognize that we're on that vector to that horizon, and if we want further conversation with regards to the direction we're heading as a community. So it allows us this opportunity to actually have a deep breath and think about things a little bit more deeply, and we like to invite in thought leaders that can engage with us in the conversation, that can help us in our discussions together and collectively as we move forward as a community. So I mentioned this is a think tank, but also it's a do tank. So what we mean by that is at the end of our conversation, with questions from council members, as well as from those that might be participating with us through our Q&A function that provided here, that we will have a conversation, and there might be some items that we want to consider moving forward on, maybe not in terms of policy, but a further exploration and a discussion within our community. So appreciate you being here and joining us today with regards to the Futures Committee. We do have an item of business related to, we have our minutes from our, I'm just checking the meeting date, which was November 9th, 2020. And I need a motion for approval of the minutes. Emily?
I move to approve the minutes from the November 9th Futures Committee.
Thanks, Emily.
Second.
And all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
So they're approved. And with that, we now move to, we're ready to have the conversation with regards to the future of housing and communities of opportunity. And we welcome Jonathan Rose with us here today. Jonathan, thank you so much.
But thank you so much for having me. And I'm so impressed that you have this Futures Committee and that you're so proactively thinking about the long-term issues that affect you. And I've looked at some of the past issues that you've looked at, and I'm really impressed. So good work. You're doing the right thing for your community.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. I'm going to hold up and turn it over to Jackie to do.
Oh, sorry. Oh, oh.
No, that's okay. To do a proper introduction so that, it actually helps set the context that you can proceed from there. So, Jack.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and welcome, Jonathan. We've been preparing together for this day. I think you said a gracious yes to our invitation a couple months ago now. And so I know many of us have been anxiously awaiting this day, so excited for the conversation. So thank you again. And yeah, I just wanted to set the context, give an introduction, and then we'll turn it over to you because I know you're going to be leading your own slides. One of the things that the mayor mentioned was kind of that it's a variety of topics that this committee explores together. And when we were really kind of paused when COVID hit to really think about what were the priority topics this committee wanted to focus on with this council before the upcoming election in April and the remainder of the time, housing was already a community and council priority before COVID hit. And COVID has only deepened our understanding of what a priority this really is. And so the future of housing rose to the top as one of the top topics that the Futures Committee wanted to discuss together during this time. And really in the context of other values and outcomes in our community, which I've shared with you a bit about, and the priorities this council has in terms of achievable and affordable housing, equity and inclusion. And when our colleagues that are working on housing the city really scanned the environment of who are those thought leaders that we could bring in to help guide this conversation. Jonathan, your name just kept coming up, and I just want to say how grateful I am because the connection to you was from another Futures Committee topic that we had about the future of mindful cities. And Jonathan is a supporter of the Mindful Cities Initiative. We heard from our partners in Flint, Michigan and Jackson, Wyoming, and Jonathan's involved, and James Gimian, the director for the Foundation for Mindful Society, connected us with Jonathan. And so it's just so amazing, again, how these different connections come together. And again, thank you for saying yes. So I wanted to just give a background introduction so everyone fully understands kind of the background that Jonathan is bringing to what he's going to be sharing today. So if you'll allow, Jonathan Rose's business, public policy, and non-for-profit work all focus on creating more environmentally, socially, and economically resilient cities. That line just makes my heart sing as the Chief Sustainability Officer in our city that is devoted to the triple bottom line. And you really see that. I mean, the triple bottom line is something we talk about in Fort Collins so much. It is in the fabric of Jonathan's lifelong work. In 1989, Mr. Rose founded Jonathan Rose Companies, a multidisciplinary real estate development, planning, and investment firm, which creates real estate and planning models to address the challenges of the 21st century. Jonathan has led the firm's vision, program, and growth, developing award-winning new projects, investment funds, and city plans to model solutions to the issues of housing, economic development, and environment. The company's mission is to develop communities that enhance opportunity for all, that topic of the future of communities of opportunity. The firm's work touches many aspects of community health, working with cities and nonprofits to build affordable and mixed income housing, cultural, health, and educational infrastructure, and advocates for neighborhoods to be enriched with parks and open space, mass transit, jobs, and healthy food. Just this introduction is all that we hold dear in Fort Collins, so I loved reading it. Mr. Rose's book, if we were all together, we'd be carrying our copies because I know many of us have been reading this book and being dorks asking Jonathan to sign our copies, but he's the author of The Well-Tempered City, What Modern Science, Ancient Civilizations, and Human Nature Teach Us About the Future of Urban Life. And so the local government, city leaders, community leaders represented here today, we're just so excited to learn from you, and thank you so much again for being a thought leader to talk about the future of housing and communities of opportunity with us here in Fort Collins.
Thank you, Jackie. And I'm sorry I jumped in earlier because I was wonderful to hear. Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. And again, I really applaud you all for the wonderful work that you're doing, and even that you had the foresight to do this work. So if you, just a second, I'm going to share my screen. And you should all see a map of the United States. Do you see a map of the United States?
Looks good.
Okay. So this is a map. It comes from a project of a guy named Raj Chetty, and it's of intergenerational poverty. So the deeper the red, so let's back up. Let me explain what this is about. If you were born in 1940 and you turned 26 in 1966, and you were born in a bottom quartile family in American income, there was a 90% chance that when you turned 26, you would be earning more than your low-income parents. And interestingly, this was, although we were a deeply racially divided country during that period, this was across all races. It's the time when poor Blacks moved from the South, moved to the North and got better union jobs. And but it was also, there were just a lot of interesting dynamics, economic dynamics. There was a lower birth rate during the war. And so there was a dearth of shortage of labor, and for all kinds of reasons, it was a time of extraordinary American opportunity. If you were born in 1990 and turned 26 in 2016, there was this, and you were born in a bottom quartile family, there was a 70% chance that you were earning less than your low-income parents. So this is the issue of intergenerational opportunity. And this map shows the deeper the red, the worse the chance that, the greater the chance that you'll be earning less than your low-income parents. And the reason I start out with this is that there are many issues that we as a nation and you as a city have to address. Climate change is critically one, and racial divides are critically one. But I also believe that my goal today is to talk to you about income inequality and how we create what we call communities of opportunity, which are what are the tools to overcome this. And by the way, they all tie together. So there's really no one way to solve any one issue without solving the others. The communities of opportunity are based upon the integration of all these elements. So the base is affordable housing, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And I know that you're being very proactive and you've set proactive goals for it. This is a hard problem because affordable housing must be subsidized. And that calls on limited resources from you, and there's only limited resources from CHAFA and other state resources. We do have confidence, or we have hope, that with the new Biden administration, there's a much bigger commitment to affordable housing. America today only builds 50,000 new units of affordable housing through the low-income housing tax credit program, and we lose 120,000 to gentrification. So we're going backwards. And I bet you're experiencing that in Fort Collins. Education, so clearly, as we move into a much more digital environment, we're even more deeply being divided by those who can work from home. I spent over 9 months now in this home office doing working really, really well, but I have employees who have to be on our properties every day, removing the garbage and cleaning apartments and things that can't do that by Zoom. They have to do that with their hands. Healthcare, we've always known how important healthcare is, but again, the pandemic really shows that all of our health, our community's health, we are all in it together. Parks and open space are essential parts of healthy communities and also part of the mental health of our communities. Neighborhood serving markets, particularly food. One of the interesting things, it's very interesting how the pandemic has shed a light on many aspects of where our society is working and where it's not. And the need for distributed neighborhood markets, I think, has remained strong. Arts and culture. We often talk about arts and culture as kind of the surplus, the goodie on top of the cake, the icing on the cake. It's a nice thing to have if we can have it. I actually have a very different view. If you go back to the very history of the emergence of language in people about 50,000 years ago, simultaneously at the same time with the emergence of music, art, culture, and religion. I mean, it occurred in earlier forms, but that's really when it got sophisticated. And these were all aspects of the ability of the human mind to have symbolic thought. And if you think about the jobs of the future, when automation, which will take over, and that should be a subject, if it hasn't been already, of your futures committee, the jobs that humans will do in the future, I hope, will be the caring jobs of healing people and natures, and the jobs of symbolic thought, of creativity and imagination, that the computers and automation won't be as adept at doing. And arts and culture train, when little children learn to play, read notes and play classical music and play in string quartets and have to hear each other and coordinate, there's tremendous amount of skill building in that area. Access and transit, mass transit, as we know, in walkable communities, we know are so essential. Livelihood as jobs. I'm going to get a spiritual in the last, and there's one more thing which is not on this chart, which we're going to add, which is the digital divide. So the other thing that this COVID period has really shown us is how important it is to have every resident of a city on the same side, equally digitally, with equal digital access. And digital access not only means a high-speed internet access, but it also means having a computer, and it means having enough computers. So if a parent needs one for work and a kid needs one because their school is doing schooling by computer, they both need computers, they need software, they need training, and they really need a digital culture. And what we're finding associated with affordable housing is that at any rate, the lack of people having digital bank accounts, et cetera, it's all an impediment. So the digital divide is very big here. And the reason why spiritual is here is I'm so glad that you are part of the Mindful City movement. Did all of you see, or are you aware of the Flint, Michigan sheriff and the Walk With Me event? So when the deep disturbances were happening regarding in protest to the murder of George Floyd happened all over the country, there was a video that went viral of the sheriff of Genesee County, which is where Flint, Michigan is, with all his riot gear and all his guys with riot gear going into a march that was about to take place, protesting the police and the murder of George Floyd. And he said, he pulled off his mask and he says to the participants, "What do you want?" And they said, "March with us." And he turned to his guys and said, "Take off all your gear and we're going to the march." And they joined the march and they marched together. And at the end, they had arranged to have water and food for the marchers. It completely transformed. It turned the antagonism into a we. Well, it turns out that the sheriff had been a member of Mindful Flint, and the head of the march had been a member of Mindful Flint. And so they had a complete other language and context and framework for how to work together. And okay, so you know what? I want to make this interactive. So I'm going to go on to say, before I go on to the next slide, any questions or any comments, or let's turn this into a discussion. And also tell me, Jackie, when should I be done by?
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for asking. I think that we had you scheduled to be done, a little bit before 5 to allow for plenty of time for discussion and dialogue.
Okay. No, what I'm going to do, what I'm saying is I'm going to try and move the dialogue into the presentation.
Yeah.
So when do you want me totally done by?
Oh, totally done by, I think we're going to 5:30 today.
You got it. Okay. Any thoughts or comments about this?
I would just add in, where you're coming from, I think we resonate strongly, like the digital divide, and your example about the Flint, Michigan sheriff, our chief exhibited and our officers exhibited much the same, graciousness and inclusivity and I think we experience much the same defusing during a highly volatile period, and not to say again, and I don't want to give the impression we got it figured out. We don't, but I think what we have are a lot of the openness and curiosity in our community, and that's where I think your this discussion is so timely. So I just want to react in that way, and also in reading your book and just a lot of the phraseology and the words that you use, the symbolic thought and so forth. In my background, which I'm on the faculty at CSU, but not so much about the discipline. But have you ever met or just had a conversation with Douglas Hofstadler and Goethe, Lescher, and Bach and Eternal Braid? And it's so complementary to what you're talking about. I'll put that in the chat it's a book, probably about 25 years old now, but it's a piece that really builds on a lot of the systems and the coherence of pulling all this together. And you come at it from a city planning development and a holistic perspective. And this is not so much city planning, but it is very much in line with the conversation that you've been leading for so long.
So that's a beautiful book, great inspiration to me. And I'm so glad that you referred to it. And actually, this is something I think we can really take inspiration from other things and bring them into the field of city planning, because these are all human and environmental issues. And at any rate, please share that link. It's a great book for everybody. And as I said, it was an early inspiration for me.
That's awesome. Thank you.
So this is a picture of a project called Benedict Commons, which our company built as affordable housing in Aspen, Colorado in 1996. And here's the reason why I bring it up. It happens to be, so first of all, I normally ask people, how many units an acre do you think this is? And they always misguess. This is actually 88 units to the acre, and it doesn't look it. So, we should never be scared of density in affordable housing. And when this was proposed, there was a lot of concern. This is right in the heart of the downtown from the wealthy neighbors across the street, that they didn't want to be looking at affordable housing, yet this looks like almost any other building in Aspen built at the time. And so one of the key issues, I think, on getting community acceptance for affordable housing is the design. But here's the large point I wanted to point out. Aspen created its first affordable housing zoning requirement in 1976 and began a fund, which I'm going to describe in a minute. And today, Aspen, 25% of all housing in Aspen is affordable, which, considering the constraints of being in a valley and being probably one of the most expensive places on earth, is kind of amazing. And so you are the long-term future committee, and thinking about the future. I have a dog barking in the back. I just have to open a door. So just thinking about that making that these strategies, they really are worth thinking about for the long run.
Yeah.
All right. You know what? We'll see if I can tolerate this dog situation. You know what? Excuse me. I'm really sorry to do this, but one is barking, and if I don't let him out, he's gonna be barking the whole presentation. But I'll be right back. I'm the only one at home right now.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing the book name, Mayor.
You bet.
in the chat.
I'll put another link in the chat.
And we'll also capture it in the meeting minutes so that it's kind of in the record on the site too.
All right, I'm going to skip the next series of slides. These are about a project we developed in Denver called Highland Garden Village, because I really want to get, we can always go back to this example. So we're doing as a company today, we're doing two things, which I think, two strategies, which I want to encourage you to think about. The first one is the preservation of existing affordable housing. I don't know if you as the town, actually you can just answer this question. Have you mapped your current affordable housing. And there's two kinds. There's both regulated, so for example, low-income housing tax credit or Section 8 projects, and what are called NOAA or naturally occurring affordable housing. It's just stuff that rents at a cheaper rent. Do you know those resources in your community?
And I'm gonna, did we do that as part of the committee, Emily?
We haven't done it as a committee, but Jackie, I do believe we have a map with those
Right.
on there, and I think it does include some natural as well. Is that correct, Jackie? Yeah, so we do.
That's correct.
Right. So I strongly recommend that you map them, and then it's so hard to build new affordable housing. The first thing is to try and preserve your existing affordable housing. And there are a lot of resources to be able to do that. And by the way, we can have a separate conversation. It's something that our company is very active in doing. We'd be happy to work with you on that. Our strategy is that when we buy affordable housing, we then commit to its long-term preservation. We make it green following the Enterprise Green Community Guidelines, and we bring social health and education programs to our residents to carry out that concept that I described earlier of communities of opportunity. So this happens to be a project that's in Manchester, Connecticut, which is a suburb of Hartford, Connecticut. It is a low-rise community. There's about 1,000, there are 380 units here and about 1,000 people who live on this site. Very typical of the affordable housing that was built in the early 1980s. It had no community resources, so when we bought it, we built a $2 million community center for the residents, and this is what it looks like. So a place that actually that can host all kinds of events for our residents. In all of our projects, we build a health exam room that looks like this. It's very inexpensive. It costs maybe $8,000. And we then partner with local healthcare agencies. Most low-income people are served by Medicare or Medicaid, but even if they're not, the fact that somebody can come to our site and meet, 50, 100 patients at a time, or however many they want to fill, makes it very cost effective for them. And so many people are falling through the healthcare cracks that being able, particularly with children, for example, preschool exams, etc., being able to be seen at the home site makes a big difference. You also, one of the real issues we've seen in COVID, and I'm going to talk more about, is the whole issue of childcare. So if you're working and you got to try and get a kid to the doctor, and you've got to, but who's taking care of the other kids, and blah, it's hard enough for two parent working families, but when you get to a one parent working family who may be working 2 part-time jobs, etc., it gets really difficult. And so providing, and again for low-income seniors who may not be able to drive, etc., providing just this access to healthcare on site makes a huge difference. And we've basically found in every community we work, and we're working over 100 communities around America, that we can find agencies that appreciate having this facility and will come and see the residents. We ask, and I've organized the rest of the presentation this way, our healthcare services to focus on what we call 4 areas of health, which is move, nourish, connect, and be. So all of our projects have an exercise room so that our residents can be prescribed working out and can actually participate in working out. We try and build walking trails and other things too. This is another project with that. So one of the things also that we do is we build into our budgets a resident service coordinator. So that's one person. It's a social service agent, a social service person. It's basically costs about $90,000 a year with benefits. And that person then coordinates. So we're not providing the healthcare, that person is connecting with the healthcare agency. Things like these exercise classes, etc., come from Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCAs, and other programs, community recreation programs. Again, we're providing the space and the organization of them. healthy food is really, really critical, particularly for low-income populations. And I presume that you've seen a rise in demand for food bank services, et cetera, in Fort Collins during this COVID period. And so we work with things called mobile groceries or food share or food banks, et cetera, that bring healthy food to our residents. We work on healthy transportation, so all our projects have bike rooms, community gardens. These are raised beds for seniors because we're trying to reinculcate a culture of growing and connection to nature and healthy food. And these are kids who are the kids gardeners. Many of our residents, having lived in food deserts, haven't had experience cooking vegetables much or making salads and stuff. So we bring in people to actually teach them about how to cook and prepare healthy food. So that's the move. And so the 4 parts of this health program are move, nourish, connect, and be. So I've talked to you about movement, and particularly we try and integrate yoga into the movement, and the nourishing part, the connecting part. So socialization is so important for neural development and social development. So we really work on that with kids, and we work on connecting in all kinds of ways. By the way, this is another interesting one, which is something we call our, it's a community library. We call it Common Goods. And in our buildings, we put a series of things that you don't need that often, but that so you don't have to go out and buy them, that you can share them. Basically, you can check them out. Turns out the most popular thing is a ladder, but it's a way of reducing consumption, and people also donate things that they don't need anymore to the Common Goods. We work a lot on building intergenerational relationships and intergenerational communities, and we want to talk about that a little bit with the future of affordable housing. So the current low-income housing tax credit programs are quite rigid in their 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, the design, the allocation, the whole way waiting lists are constructed, et cetera. I think what COVID has really reminded us is that more than 100 years ago, we did not have anything called senior housing because we lived in intergenerational housing. And when we lived in intergenerational housing, grandparents could take care of grandkids. I don't know about some of you, but I have a daughter and son-in-law who moved in with us for 9 months, and we took it. My wife and I helped take care of our grandkids, and it was of enormous benefit to my working children and enormous benefit to us. It was so amazing to be with that grandchild and so amazing for the grandchild. So our current housing structure doesn't permit that. And as you really think about the future of work, there's going to probably be hybrid. Some work from home, some work not at home, et cetera. I think the more that we can figure out how to develop intergenerational affordable housing, I think it's really a critical challenge, and I encourage you to think about it. I do have some ideas about it that we can talk about later. We really believe deeply in citizen participation and civic participation. And I'm sure you all would like people to vote for you. And we work very hard to get our residents registered to vote and then informed about the issues so that they can be informed citizens. Each one of our, part of Connection, I mentioned the digital divide. Each one of our community facilities has a computer room, and we need to think more expansively about this now because our rooms were not big enough for accommodating all kids when everybody had to come home from, when schools were closed down and many of the communities were in. Interestingly, this photo was taken by the computer tech guy who just came in to hook up the computers. It wasn't his job to be the teacher. And the kids just swarmed in and said, show us, show us, show us. And he took this 20 minutes after he set up the computers. These kids were in and working and online. And you can see how excited they were about that and how important this really is. We also use bring in people who teach English as second languages and do job training, et cetera, for our residents. Security is super important too, and we really try and build positive community relations between our local police and our residents. And um, we understand that police have so many roles in communities and kind of social roles, social service roles in addition, but they're a real important part of the health of our communities. Speaking of intergenerational, so you benefit from having an extraordinary university in your midst. This is a class that each year, the freshman class at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, that as its volunteer work comes and teaches our low-income seniors at this project called Grace West Manor in Newark. They teach them computer skills, and then those seniors do the after-school monitoring and mentoring with the kids in the computer lab. So it's a real cycle of connection. This is also in that project in Newark, a yoga class, an arts class, and we mentioned how important we think the Mindful Cities movement is, and meditation is so critical for stress. It's not only, so there's the reason I'm pausing is there's a very functional benefit to yoga and meditation. But we need to move beyond that too. There's in terms of stress reduction and just taking a break there and lowering our heart rates and our health and all those things are very well documented. But there's a larger capacity that we grow to. These really help us move from our reactive mode of our brain. I think many of you involved in Mindful Cities probably know this, to not only a more strategic role, but an expansive and integrative frame of mind. And it is really that frame of mind, the more expansive, integrative, holism seeking state of mind that is the one that I think we will most likely solve our problems. To implement them, we need to be tactical, and we need to kind of get into a budget and schedule and who's going to do what frame of mind. But to conceive of the solutions, we need to be in a more expansive and holistic, integrating frame of mind. So I'm going to end this portion of the presentation. So these are within these projects. One of the things is that, we're working at the layer of the individual, at the layer of the community and within the building, and then we really like these things to radiate out. So that particular project I showed you in Newark has a pretty dangerous park across the street where there's drug dealing and stuff going on. And on weekends, the neighbors our residents do this thing called Hug the Block, where they go to the four corners of the park and they take it over. This happens to be a prayer circle. This is a gospel singing, yoga class. This is, by the way, an amazing pose. Yoga in the park. And it makes it free. It makes it safe and free for not only the residents of our project, but the residents of all the communities around it. So really thinking about how the community of opportunity resources radiate out. This is a new construction project that I want to show you that is in construction now in New York City. That is really a model of what a community of opportunity can be. And the reason I'm showing this to you, so this is 700 units of mixed income housing that will go from formerly homeless to middle income. And it has within it, and I'll show you 50,000 square feet of a new charter high school. It has 12,000 square feet with a not-for-profit called Union Settlement House. It has all the after-school classrooms and senior programs and youth programs, teen programs for kids involved in just getting involved in the justice systems, job training programs. It has 4 community gardens, an arts program, and other resources. There was a moment in which the city said to us, we have such an affordable housing crisis that if we didn't have all that other wonderful things that you have in this project, we could have maybe 80 or 100 more units of affordable housing. And maybe that would have been better. And one of the most important points I want to make to you today is, and I fully recognize how everybody needs to be housed and how important affordable housing is and the volume of affordable housing, but I do not believe it would have been better. I actually believe that by providing that we don't just need affordable housing for people to survive in. We need affordable housing that people can thrive in. We really need to build communities of opportunity. And so we need to figure out not only the components of health that I showed you, but how do we provide daycare? How do we support families that are single parent working families? How do we really make our housing a platform in which the child who lives there and grows up there really does have a better chance in America today? And so I encourage you to think, and it's harder to finance, it's harder in every way, but I really want to encourage you to think about integrating these components into housing. So just a little bit more about this project. One of the other things is, and this goes to Gödel, Escher, and Bach, I designed everything in Fibonacci proportions, which are the sacred proportions of nature. It may not be obvious initially, but here's where you can see the 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. And what we did is, because look, this is affordable housing, so it's just a plain brick building, but by putting these patterns in, so you can see the Fibonacci is going up on one side and down on another and across on another. You can see these, now you can begin to see how the Fibonacci plays. So it just takes an ordinary facade and makes it more alive. Here it is again on the low-rise portion of the building. Now this is interesting. This happens to be in a Hispanic community. And they said, well, this Fibonacci is really nice for you, but that's not our culture. So what are you gonna do for us? And they were right. So a brilliant architect is working on this project, also a deep student of music. And the salsa music is based on a beat called the clave. And the clave is a 2-3 beat or 3-2 beat. So it goes da 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 or da 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 da. Now Tito Puente, who is from East Harlem, his magic music transformation was he did something called the East Harlem flip, where it would go from 2-3 to 2-3 to 2-3 to 2-3 to flip to 3-2, 3-2, 3-2. So we have the East Harlem flip in the facade proportions in this direction and the Fibonacci in the other direction, and everybody's happy. By the way, this pathway, the colored part is actually this walking path through the whole project, which follows the path almost, not exactly, but almost of an old Lenape Indian trail. We designed it to maximize the sunlight in through the project. And then created this incredible series of internal gardens that have an amphitheater and children's play areas. By the way, the plantings we use in all of our projects are the indigenous species that were in that location prior to 1492. We think it's really important to try and restore indigenous ecologies. This is an image of the amphitheater. We have one section that has the map of the stars from above and the ground below, so that you can sit there with literally LED lights so you can learn the stars. And I want to end with this picture, which is this amazing church in the Sagrada Familia, which is in Barcelona, designed by Gaudi. And here all the proportions of nature are in this amazing creation of human creation. And I say this because we talk about so much, we use the phrase humans and nature as though we are two things that are separate. But the reality is that all of human nature follows the rules of nature. We are a product of nature. And my sense is if we can bring this magnificent beauty of nature back into our projects, that is really our highest task. There's an architect named Christopher Alexander who said, making wholeness heals the maker. So in creating communities of opportunity, to me, their mission is to make wholeness of our residents, make wholeness of our neighborhoods, make wholeness of our cities. And in being wholeness makers, that heals us too.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. And I'm going to open it up to our council members with any comments or thoughts. And then I'd like to after we have that discussion, have Julie Bruin. She's our she's head of our housing authority, what we call Housing Catalyst, and just share some of the things that we're trying to do, and just have the conversation around what you're doing. So, and first of all, Julie Pignataro or Emily, either of you want to? Okay, Julie, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jonathan. It's super inspiring and awesome to see all those projects. So I get a C for my assignment. I only got to part 2 of your book. I did not get a chance to finish it, but I did want to ask, because so much of those early civilizations, the center of it was around like a theistic or, you know, some kind of deity. And you have that spiritual part of your pie chart. Is a movement like mindfulness that is not quite so big G God-centered or, you know, anything like that. Can it take the place of something like that? You know, as far as the, yeah.
Yes. So first of all, we are there are many religions in the United States, and I actually think something that is non-theistic it helps us avoid the conflicts of and there really, interestingly, there are meditations in every tradition. Amongst the many I've studied with an amazing Coloradan, Father Thomas Keating, who teaches something called contemplative prayer, which is an ancient Christian from the Desert Fathers meditation tradition. It seems as close to Zen Buddhism as I can imagine. So, so mindfulness helps us. I think it helps us all come together and opens that part of the mind, which is more spiritual, without the reference of the things that can divide us. The other thing, by the way, look, it's a big, thick book with a lot of words in it. So I give everybody a free pass to jump to section 4. Section 4 and 5 are shorter. They go really quickly, and they really have the essence of the community of opportunity ideas. And so you're welcome to do that. And then if you want to go back and if you read the middle part, you can, but anyway.
Okay, thank you for the tip.
No, Jonathan, that's not fair. Some of us read through the entire document, so you can't.
Listen, I read the whole thing. I really appreciate it. I read it many, many times. So Darren, I appreciate that, but
I'm teasing you. Yeah, it's a beautiful book, and the early parts of the book were. And as a city planner and civil engineer, I just want to tell you, I really appreciated the context. You know, some of that work and some of those names I hadn't heard since planning school. And it was a beautiful reminder. And what it made me think about is, you know, the hope that I have for our planners who are coming out of planning school, particularly those that are coming out of urban design programs.
right.
You just really reminded me of the importance of that. And Ian McHarg and his work, and Kevin Lynch, Image of the City, and on and on and on. So I was teasing Councilmember Pignataro, but because we did talk about, you know, for busy folks, it's a big read.
Right.
But it was a beautiful book, and I really want to say thank you.
Well, thank you. I, by the way, you guys are bringing up all my references. I studied with Ian McHarg.
Oh,
and,
wow.
And who was a big inspiration to me. So look, Fort Collins, I think, is one of the most livable cities in America. So you guys have a way head start, and you're surrounded by such beautiful nature. Nature's, you have so many wonderful advantages, and a really good downtown urban fabric. So,
Well, thank you, Emily.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for being here, Jonathan. I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to say thank you. I got an F in my assignment because I haven't started the book yet. I have 2 others in front of it, but now I know I can just skip forward to 4 and 5.
exactly, you can.
But I did really appreciate your pie chart at the beginning with looking at all the different factors that go into a neighborhood and opportunity. Because I think often when we talk about housing at the city, we talk about a stick-built structure, and we often forget to zoom out and look at the kind of human-centered side and looking at all the pieces that really need to go together to make people have an opportunity to thrive here. And so I did really appreciate looking at that whole picture. And while housing is a key part of that, we do really need to think about how do we expand so that everyone has access and opportunity. And I think it was really nice to see and then kind of hear about how that goes together. And I know that Julie here, I sit on the board of Housing Catalyst and know all the great work that they're up to. And so I'm excited to hear from her and kind of update folks on the things that she's doing, because I think they align a lot with what you're talking about. So I just wanted to say thank you for kind of bringing that to us in the presentation, and I look forward to reading the book as well.
Thank you. So I just want to say something about that pie chart. Those elements come from something called the social determinants of health. And what we have learned is that getting sick and having a doctor prescribe, medicine for you really is only 20% of the factors of our health. And that things like having stable, affordable housing and living in a non-toxic environment and having steady work and all those things are equally determine 80% of our health. And what's really interesting, I don't know if you've looked at zip code maps of lifespan. If not, they're really interesting to look at. And you can easily find it on Google, if you search for it. But what we can see is there's literally places where, a mile from one location to another, people will have a 20-year difference in potential lifespan, 60 to 80 years or 10 or 15-year difference. And the differences to the social determinants of health in some ways are individual culture related, but are very deeply geographic related. And that means if there are things that are wrong in a physical situation, for example, better schools in one neighborhood than another, they can be physically corrected.
Well, Jonathan, you're speaking my language. I have a background in public health and work in public health. And so that those social determinants of health are our gospel. And it's great to bring those things into the conversation and talk about the impact on your lifespan as well. So thank you for bringing that.
Yeah, so you should give the talk on that, not me.
Thank you, Emily. Julie, I'm going to go to Julie Ruin. Thank you, Julie, for joining us today. And as Jonathan was talking, I know that it was spurring a lot of thoughts in you. And so I'd just like you to share some of the things that Housing Catalyst is doing and with Jonathan and the rest of us.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Well, Jonathan, I've heard you speak several times over the years, Housing Colorado and other conferences. I've been developing affordable housing now for 27 years, 2 different housing authorities. Housing Catalyst is the largest affordable tax credit developer in Northern Colorado. And we've done a lot of new construction and the largest acquisition rehab preservation deal in our area. Permanent supportive housing. We opened our second PSH today. First resident moved in today. Yay!
Congratulations.
Thank you. We have exam rooms in permanent supportive housing. We have fitness centers in all of our developments. We have school district partnerships and sites for food bank. I just could have just done this the whole time that you were speaking. I did want to say a couple of other things. Housing Catalyst is just wrapped up its 6th year of formal mindfulness training for all staff. Out of our 88 staff, I had 27 staff members sitting and learning every day of the week for an entire month for an hour on work time. So that was a pretty exciting anniversary date. I also happen to be the chair of the CHAFA board. So I am wondering if you could say a few words about private activity bond scarcity, and then also a few more words around density. We have one development that council members are very familiar with, 96 units that was developed in LMN zoning. So we were at 12 DUs per acre. And the joke is we could have gone in at night in the dark and doubled it and no one in the surrounding neighborhoods would have even known. So if you could talk a little bit more about your opening statement about subsidies needed for affordable housing and the scarcity of private activity bonds, and a little more about density, I think it would really be great.
Great, thank you. And TAF is an amazing agency. We've worked with it for almost 30 years, and it doesn't have enough resources. It totally needs more bonds. That is one of the key priorities that we hope that we can get in Washington in the new administration. And I know that both John Hickenlooper and Michael Bennett will be very supportive of that. So at any rate, but we're also know that typically the bonds are, and I don't know how it works in Fort Collins, but the bonds are not enough to fully subsidize the development or project. You also need some form of home or local match. Is that true?
That is correct. And we only get about 8.5 million in bond caps. So when Housing Catalyst does a deal, we're cobbling together multiple years and we're trying to get the Larimer County bond cap and sometimes neighboring counties involved.
Right. So number one, we absolutely need more bond cap, and there's definitely a lot of affordable housing advocates eager for that. But I actually think if you tell your federal representatives that, because there's going to be a lot of like effort about what's going to be in the first 100 days, there is an opportunity for more bond cap in the new tax reconciliation bill. And so now's the time to really speak for it. And I and others are speaking for that too. And by the way, it's amazing that you got that you brought mindfulness so completely through the agency. Do you have any lessons you can do? What made it work so well?
Well, it's interesting. They're really simple things that I want to figure out how to build on, in addition to the staff that choose to really do the formal training. I start every staff meeting and now board meetings, as Emily knows, with the ringing of a wren, and we just sit. So they don't know it, but they're being trained.
Right. Good for you. And so you asked about bond cap, and I can't remember, what was the second thing?
Density.
Okay, so density, remember I opened this with this picture in Aspen and said this is 88 units to the acre, and yet it's a project that I think most communities would be happy to have within them. Many years ago, and I don't know if this is still the situation, Fort Collins had an urban growth boundary. Do you still have an urban growth boundary? Okay, so I went to the boundary and I took a photograph, and this is towards the south of Fort Collins. And what was so interesting was outside the boundary was denser than inside the boundary. Does that make sense to you? There was a denser development outside the boundary than what Fort Collins had zoned.
That's possible for sure.
Yeah, and it was such a surprise to me because it was supposed to be the other way around. So we call this density by design. We really try and get people get all hung up on numbers. And so we try and really show people attractive projects and have them approve the concept of the project and not the number. And if you're zoning, so it sounds like you have a zoning that restricts you in key places to 12 units to the acre. Is that true?
That's right.
Yeah. So that, by the way, that causes every problem. That, you can't solve the affordable housing problem that way. You can't solve the walkability problem that way, or the transportation problem that way. You think when in your cycle of zoning, can you address that now? Do you have to wait for a rezone? When can that most easily be addressed?
Well, Darren,
Jonathan, any Tuesday night at 6 o'clock, if the council wanted to consider some of that. It's interesting. I'm hearing you talk, and in your book, you mentioned Peter Calthorpe as a brother-in-law.
Yes.
When I was in Portland, Vancouver, Washington area, back in my early days as a planner, Peter Calthorpe and a gentleman by the name of Anton Nelson, that had a technique called visual preference surveys.
Yep.
And we actually had Anton Nelson here in Fort Collins in the 90s as well. Or late 90s. What's really interesting is you know, the density, we've been dogged with the word density for so long. When Anton Nelson and Peter Calthorpe took on this approach about what are your visual preferences, it really changed a lot of the dialogue. And I think, you know, I know Councilmember Gorgel and others on this call are very interested around affordable housing, and there's this deep fear of density equals bad, and particularly in neighborhoods where we're talking about accessory dwelling units and occupancy limits and things like that. So I'm really glad, Julie, that you asked the question about density, because you know, I think that's sort of fundamentally integrated throughout your entire book. And I think we just have and it's not just Fort Collins, Colorado. It was Vancouver, it was Atlanta, it was the Bay Area when I was there. And so Julie, I appreciate your question. And Jonathan, I think you're saying, you know, sensitive design is really important. Any other sort of, you know, another level around the fear that we have of density? And
Yes. So first of all, it's interesting that fear is shifting a lot in America because of the demand for affordable housing. So just as there are NIMBYs, you know, there's a rising YIMBY movement. Are you familiar with that? The
yes.
Yes in My Backyard. So I think it's a time in which we can readdress the issue of density. And again, I think, you know, look, people are right. Big brick and concrete, ugly, affordable housing from the 70s, nobody should want in their backyard. People shouldn't have to live there, and people shouldn't want those in their backyard. I totally get that. But we're so far more advanced in the design that we can deliver. So I think partly, by the way, putting together slideshows of images of the positive development that people would like actually to have nearby, focusing more on mixed income housing to the extent that we can do that is also really good. The younger generation actually wants density and really wants walkability. So the politics are not, I don't know how they are in Fort Collins, but around the country, we're seeing the politics have shifted where, and people who want to get into the ground floor of home ownership know that that probably means a condo or a townhouse these days. And at any rate, you add all this up and there is a larger acceptance of density. And I would show communities good models of it, and then it takes leadership, and I just push for it.
And I'll give my perspective regards to Fort Collins. So, you know, Fort Collins, in my lifetime, it's grown 8.5 times.
Huh.
And so, and we're not, basically, we consider ourselves now an infill city. So with our growth management area, basically it's infill. And where a lot of the conversation is now is between that and open space. Well, you know, through tax initiative and many other things, we have a lot of open space, and we have nature in the city, and you know, really enhancing one's access and ability to get to nature. But it also translates into that lot next door. I want that as open space, you know, and so you start and regardless of what the current density zoning might be. And so we do have a city plan that, you know, thinks about adjacencies and, you know, and the transportation corridors and building densities along those corridors and that sort of thing. Really, and also thinking about being a university city and the, you know, the kinds and types of housing that we have for all in our community, and you know, and also bring in you know, as we think about our chronic homeless community, and you know, and thinking about that more holistically within our community, and not just you know, the chronic homeless, but you know, Julie, one of our, and I think it was the project that opened the day, like a housing first model, as it relates to our homeless community, chronic and episodic, and really the full spectrum as it relates to homeless within our community. But beyond just thinking about homeless, you know, zooming out and thinking about community wellness, and there's a full spectrum that engages everyone in our community, and thinking, more holistically about our community in terms of community wellness across the board. And then, everyone is considered in that broader framing and that spectrum. And so just to get back to density, we are becoming denser, but it's interesting how these conversations around development and densities ebb and flow. And now, it's just interesting how that changes with time.
So it's very good that the community proactively preserved a bunch of open space. And to the extent that those can be connected into networks. So if you were to ask me, where should there be more open spaces? If there's two systems and there's a connective path that you could open up or connect. But open space is the perfect thing to put density around. So think about like Central Park in New York City, surrounded by density. And you're seeing that happen, by the way, on the Beltline in Atlanta and the High Line in New York, et cetera. These, we have a lot of urban examples where open space and density together go together very nicely.
Right. And we're activating some of the quieter assets, if you will. For example, we have a irrigation system ditches through our community, which have really been for conveyance of water and for agriculture, now primarily for it's within an urban context, and making those into more natural nature corridors and riparian corridors, and really bringing those to the fore instead of just what their original long-term purpose had been, and thinking about them more in terms of our nature in the city and so forth. I saw Lindsay X turn on her camera a little bit ago, but I'm sure Lindsay's got some perspectives on this. And with that, I'm going to go to Jackie to help facilitate. But Lindsay, what were you jumping out of your seat on?
Well, thanks, Mayor. Good evening, Jonathan. I'm Lindsay X. I'm the interim housing manager, and I also permanently lead up our climate action efforts at the city. And so I swooned over the earlier reference to Ian McHarg. I'm a planner by trade as well. And I really appreciate the focus on the system. In our community, we talk about all outcome areas and how housing is an integral part of all of our entire systems of wellness and well-being in our community. And I'm one of the top priority strategies that is coming out of our housing strategic plan right now is to re-examine our density. And so really appreciated the expertise that you bring to that conversation as well. And as always, hearing from Julie as our affordable housing leader for how we're advancing the vision that you're speaking to today. So just appreciative and having a major planner, nerd alert, and just I'm really grateful for this moment today in this committee as well.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. And I can't remember when I mentioned the Sendero Verde project, that it's the largest passive house project in the United States too. And so one of the things I really encourage you to think about is the only way we're going to move beyond fossil fuels is electrification. And I presume you've thought about, so we have to upgrade the grid. If our goal is to ultimately have all of our buildings electric and all of our cars and vehicles electric, then we need a grid that can accommodate them. We are starting to only build electric buildings going forward, so that if you buy green energy, then they're carbon neutral. When you get to higher density, even if we put solar on the roofs, we can't completely power the building from the sun, but then the network can. By the way, going back to Chafa, in some cases, we're finding that it depends on the market, but electric hot water is more expensive than gas hot water. And so this has an implication on the utility allowance issue. But so we are actually in some markets where we've been pushed to have gas hot water when we try and do all electric buildings because of this. So it's just something that needs to be examined. But I really believe that if we're going to future-proof our building stock, that we should try and make everything going forward all electric.
Well,
I think that's something that's coming out of the governor's energy office right now. And the governor has had a lot more hands-on with the CHAFA qualified application plans when that's how the tax credits are allocated. And the governor's energy office for the past 2 rounds has been really helping direct that.
Great.
And I would just jump in on the electrification. So we're a municipal electric. We 4 municipalities is our power authority, and Fort Collins is half of the energy for those 4 communities, and our distribution utility is well poised for a lot more of the integration of electricity, our transportation system, as well as our housing and building stock and so forth. So we're both well poised there. And I saw Teresa Roach turn on her camera too. So I know that Teresa's got some perspectives. Teresa.
Well, thank you. And Jonathan, you had me at hello. I did read your whole book. I immediately went to listen to Bach, and I play it when I walk around our city now. So thank you so much. Jonathan, one of the things you talked about in the presentation tonight and in your book is the use of data. And so I wonder, we have a brilliant CIO who's joined the city and thinks this way, like a system. I wonder if you could talk about weaving that in to all these other wonderful conversations that we've had so far.
Great question. So first of all, there's an emerging idea called a data trust. You've got to think about, so, you know, what we're seeing is an emerging, I was going to call it a war. It's not a war, but there's going to be a lot of discussion about the privatization of data. So the way Google and Facebook use our data just to sell us stuff and all that stuff. And I really believe that, and there's another movement of what I'm going to call the data commons and data for the common good. So I'm going to give you a really simple example, which probably Fort Collins has done long ago, but about 10 years ago, the city of Washington, D.C. took all the GPS data of its buses and they made it publicly accessible. And within 3 hours, there was an app created, Next Bus, and you could go in it and see where your bus was and when it was going to show up. Of course, the bus drivers union didn't like this, but it immediately allowed consumers to, they could sit and have coffee and something, see where, run out just in time to get the bus. Bus ridership went up. Bus satisfaction went up. People could then automatically see how long it's going to take to get to their work or whatever. Just give that as a small example. There's all kinds of public data that can be shared and used for the common good. The other thing is that we're going to move, just as the future of work is going to be much more hybrid. There's going to be a lot more Zooming as well as being physically in place together. I don't think that's going to go away. To the extent that we can use data to better and better inform us. So I'm not a fan of the machines taking over and making our decisions for us, but they can do a lot. So a lot of scenario planning, for example. So for example, Peter Calthorpe now has a company called Urban Footprint that does amazing scenario that actually, if you guys aren't using, you should consider using, that does amazing scenario planning where you can, you put in all your city data and then you go, I want to optimize for better climate outcomes, or I want to optimize for better health outcomes, or I want to optimize for climate and health or whatever. And it'll run like 10,000 iterations and kind of show you where the best outcomes are. This I call future casting. And so if we have a long-term plan, it's clear that whatever you plan for 30 years from now, 30 years is going to be different than you thought it was going to be. But it gives you direction to start in. You use something like Urban Footprint to future cast through, through taking your current data and projecting trends to see where you might be going, and then you keep adjusting. So as circumstances change, as they always will, this feedback system. So if you think about nature, nature is continuously feeding back reality. It's not a static, it's a dynamic system. Our data systems have that amazing capacity to also be dynamic. And if we can kind of integrate with them, that could be hugely beneficial. The other point is that we can overwhelm ourselves with meaningless data. And so this idea of KPIs or key performance indicators, continually sifting through to try and understand what is the data that really matters, and how do you focus on that? So for example, I read a study once that said that you can take all the education data in the world, but there are 3 things that matter most in a child's development: their ability to read by 3rd grade, their math skills by 7th grade, and their high school graduation. And if you get those right, everything else falls into place. So in a way that simplifies all the other data. I mean, yes, you want to look at every kid's report card every quarter and all that stuff, but that, you know, so we need to learn what are the key indicators we need to be looking at within the data so that we can use it intelligently to optimize for better systems. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, it was. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And Jackie, I want to open it up if anybody else would like to ask a question, and then we're probably ready to close. So Jackie.
Sure. Just if anyone else wants to ask a question, I know some of the panelists are turning on cameras to kind of signal that to the mayor, but also there's the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So you can type in a question there we probably have maybe time for just 2 more or so, Mayor.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so please turn on your screen, and I appreciate the your response to Teresa and in the data. We hear a lot about smart cities and that sort of thing, and from my perspective, I think we haven't really gotten too deep on what really that means, and if it doesn't really change, meet some outcomes that are desirable for a community, then I think it's a lot of times, and I'm coming from a technology standpoint, that oftentimes we push technology, not necessarily desirable outcomes, and so really thinking about enabling kinds of things that can help in a community, that can help decision makers or help individuals make the best decision, just like your bus app is doing that too. Those are things that are valuable, and can be organic, as you suggested as well, through your community, and that's all important.
By the way, I don't know if you're doing this, but one of my favorite data things is there's a professor at University of Arizona State University who looks at wastewater. Are you looking at your wastewater?
Actually, we are. In fact, Jason Graham in our wastewater department, and Teresa Connors just turned on hers. But Teresa, why don't you just talk about what we're doing, and then working with Colorado State University and others in terms of our wastewater.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Jonathan, for the question. We are part of what we call an early surveillance program. It's 17 wastewater providers across the Front Range and CSU, the veterinary college. We have been using it. We used it specifically at CSU, monitoring manholes downstream of dorms to be able to know when we were seeing an increase of dorms of COVID. The COVID virus at the dorms, so they could quarantine or take proactive action. We do have a couple of sewer sheds, town areas within the community where we have monitoring, and we have sent out notices when we see increases in COVID. We will send out notices through the health department, through Nextdoor, an app to let folks know we see an increase and they need to be careful. And otherwise, we are monitoring at both of our wastewater plants as well. So it's, in development stage, exploratory stage. CSU has been a great partner. They make it very economical for us to do this. I mean, we're spending less than $15,000, I think, to be able to get all of this done. And so far, we're really seeing a benefit to, the effort. So at least managing the pandemic.
Right. So in addition to the COVID monitoring, there are communities that are monitoring for opioids. There are
Yeah.
communities that are monitoring for cortisol levels, just to see stress, stress
Right.
levels. You actually see where you're more stressed out. There are a lot of things that can be monitored for. There are privacy issues, of course, that come with us, come with it. But it's just another way to get kind of feedback on the health of a community.
Definitely. And we'd appreciate any input or any thoughts you want to see, because we have the source. We just
Right,
need to know what to monitor for.
Right.
And appreciate that. Thanks for coming on, Teresa, and just building on, Colorado State University, we're a university city, and recognizing the fact that that's a long-term partner and asset to our community. And there was a lot of other universities that actually had considerable spike and during, with students coming back on campus in the fall. And one of the things that, Colorado State University, through their planning, have really been active in terms of testing, but not just the traditional COVID testing, but actually through group testing, through saliva testing and so forth, that you can actually do a lot more tests to actually do pre-screening prior to subsequent the PCR testing and so forth. And we didn't have the spike with the 32,000 on-campus students. And, so we're entering our the spring semester, and the first week will be done virtually. So there will be this notion of testing and before any in-person activities begin to spin up. But I think there's been this thoughtful approach by our institutional partners, our county health director, and also working with throughout our community. Our community has actually been very responsive as it relates to the ebb and flow, if you will, of the virus.
There, I see, I think Darren Atterbury, our city manager, has the next question.
Hey, Jonathan, and I've got something I'd love your thoughts about. You mentioned rating at 3rd grade, math at 7th grade, and high school graduation. This is a community that's building fiber optic access, gig service to every premise within the town, business, household. What do you think about adding another criteria in that? And that would be digital access or equitable access to all information. What do you think about that in terms of, do these kids have equal access, and do they have as easy access as maybe my kids do? What are your thoughts about that?
So first of all, it's a wonderful thing to do. Equalizing the digital landscape, I think, is really important. My understanding is that so people need high-speed access, they need device access, so they need to have they need software access, they need training, and the last one is culture. There are some families that are more online, there's some families that are too online, and there's some families that don't have that are not enough of an online culture. And so so we need to think about all those, but certainly the hard infrastructure of a gig is fantastic. It's absolutely a great place to start.
Great, thank you.
Well, Jonathan, we're near time, and I just want to thank you. Usually at this time, I give a report on Bloomberg that I've been involved with and hopefully shared with the community a lot, and with council and our city staff, some of the things going on with Bloomberg. And the one thing that I'll share today is with City Lab, Bloomberg City Lab. And I've been fortunate to actually hear a couple of talks by Reg Chetty. And for those that, he's really brought the longitudinal data you know, through geographic information that alive to really gain a lot of insight on things. So I appreciated your kickoff slide as related to him and what a great resource to tap into, as well as his insights that he brings to a lot of our communities. And so I thank you for that. So any other final comments other than our extreme thanks and to Jonathan for joining us today and sharing really a career's work of insight and I think you speak our language when you talk about systems and integration and really what's best for our communities of opportunity. So thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
And
Thanks.
good luck to all your work.
Thank you. And with that, I think we stand adjourned. So have a good night and thanks again, Jonathan.
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you all.
Yep.
And Jackie, thanks for all your coordinating work.
Yep.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jackie.
Bye.
Thanks, you.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.